In this short video, I am going to go over 16.1 here in the IGCSE Biology book, which is about mitosis, meiosis, chromosomes, and cell division. And it's a chapter that can be a little hard, but if you're doing core, there's only very little of it you need to know. Most of the stuff in here is extended. As always, this video is made for my class and my students, and is totally non-profit, and any errors here are mine and mine alone. So if you remember from chapter 2, inside our cell we have our DNA, and in the eukaryotes the DNA is inside the cell core. Our DNA is what determines who we are. It determines what enzymes we can produce. It determines the proteins we build. It is kind of the instruction manual for who we are. And each animal, and each plant, and each organism has its own instruction manual. Now, this DNA is usually hard to see, but when the cell gets ready to divide, it gets coiled up in these structures, which are called chromosomes, which look like these small tiny sausages you can see under a microscope. In the early genetic research, there was a lot of work being done on chromosomes because that was what we could see under a microscope. But with the discovery of the three-dimensional structure of DNA by Watson and Crick, we also know quite a lot now about, really a lot about what does DNA do and how it codes for protein. On an area of our DNA will have a specific area that's called a gene. And a gene is an area that codes for a specific protein. For example, the protein that codes for me having black hair or brown eyes. Each gene usually comes in at least two different alleles, which are different versions. So for example, there can be one allele that gives blue eyes and one that gives brown eyes. So the alleles are different versions of the same gene. If you remember back to the chapter about reproduction in plants, you'll also remember that there are two different ways that we can see the amount of chromosomes. Haploid, N, and diploid, 2N. In a haploid cell, you have one copy of each chromosome, while in a diploid cell, you have two copies. Most of the cells in our body are diploid, which means we have two copies of each chromosome. But in special cells, which we're going to get into later, we only have a haploid cell, which we only have one copy of each chromosome. The way our normal diploid cells they divide is called mitosis. And in mitosis, you first have a replication of the DNA, so we have the doubling the amount of chromosomes, and then we have cell division. And in that cell division, you get a complete copy of the DNA to each of the daughter cells. That means that every cell contains exactly a copy of the same DNA as the mother cell. This is how cells divide in our body. When we were made, we started by one cell of an egg and a sperm cell, and once they fuse together, the cells they start dividing by mitosis. So each cell is a copy of the original. This is also done in asexual reproduction, where you have copies made of the original, and you end up again with a cell that can have two copies of each chromosome. But we also have another type of cell division called meiosis. If you're doing biology at a higher level than IGCSE, you have to know a lot about what all these different phases are called. But for this stage here, the IGCSE stage, it's enough to know that here we end up with a haploid cell. So you have a cell that is dividing, and it is dividing in two stages. In the first stages, you get some crossing over of the DNA between the different chromosomes, and then you get a second split, the second division, or meiosis 2, which end up with each cell only having one copy of each. Now, This is really important, for example, when you make sperm and egg cells, because you need only half the chromosomes, because you need half the chromosomes from the mother and half the chromosomes from the father to be able to recombine and make a new organism. So in meiosis, it's very important that we get this halving of the genetic material. Don't get too caught up by the names here. It's just important to know that you end up with haploid sex cells this way. It is in a way quite mean in science, yet you have two processes that do something very different that sounds almost the same: mitosis and meiosis. The important thing is to remember in mitosis, you end up with two diploid daughter cells, two copies of the mother cell, while in meiosis, you end up with four haploid daughter cells, which means in meiosis, you end up with N, while in mitosis, you end up with 2N, being the number of chromosomes there. This is the most important thing to remember when you're studying for this.